King Abishur led Zoe down one fancy hallway after another. All the while, he was issuing orders to his staff to assemble his cabinet and other government officials. Aaron Lang, Rokhaya, and William Gage followed. Zoe was overwhelmed. In addition to being overwhelmed by everything else, by being next to so many important people, especially the Guardians. They soon reached a grand circular room inside the castle. Inside were several dozen people, some seated in tall fancy chairs, and others on simpler benches. In one section of the room was the largest and grandest of chairs, clearly meant for King Abishur himself. All of them surrounded the periphery of a platform. Abishur led Zoe to the center of the room. Everyone's eyes were focused intensely on Zoe, who was still dealing with a sizable lump of nervousness in her belly. The staring was not helping. A figure seated in one of the tall chairs near the king's throne stood up. "Zoe!" The voice echoed throughout the room, and silence followed. All eyes now turned their attention to Walter Troxler, one of Abishur's top advisors and a member of the royal cabinet. Walter ran down to his daughter. "Are you okay?" he asked. Zoe was still overwhelmed with her situation and could not respond. Her stress started to ease at seeing her father. Abishur, wild-eyed at this new development, adopted a giant grin. "You are Walter's daughter?" Abishur asked. "Wait, I've met you before. Back when you were a baby. Or at least when, well, you couldn't have been much older than a toddler." The king was barely able to contain his excitement at discovering that his new guardian was the child of someone in the royal cabinet. "Don't you have a twin sister?" Abishur accurately pondered aloud. That's right. Zoe had forgotten all about Eden in the excitement of everything happening. Zoe did not recall Eden falling from the statue. She hoped that Eden was all right, but was angry at herself for going so long without giving her any thought. "Zoe, where is Eden?" Walter asked, with great concern. Zoe's worry for her sister finally gave her the energy to find her voice. She told them about the statue in the plaza and how they were atop it when she fell and everything else happened. King Abishur ordered the captain of his guard to find Zoe's twin and bring her to the castle. Walter stood up and turned to his king. "Your Majesty," he began, bowing slightly, "I appreciate what this looks like, and it would really be a miraculous thing were my little Zoe truly the new guardian of Switzerland." He waited only a moment before adding, "But what if she's not? She is clearly far too young. She's only 10. He paused to let that sink in before continuing. Simply thinking logically, it is likely that someone else is the guardian, and Zoe may have been at the wrong place at the wrong time." "I agree," replied Abishur. "Walter, you aren't my trusted advisor for nothing. That brain of yours is always keeping us out of trouble." Abishur then looked at Zoe. "Your father is right. No guardian has ever been as young as you," he said. After a moment of consideration, he continued, "Even so, you might be our guardian, and it wouldn't hurt to test you and see if you really are." Zoe gulped. "A test? What kind of test?" "Young Miss Troxler, I would like you to do it again for us now." "What?" Zoe started, before remembering with whom she was speaking. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. What would you like me to do?" Open that hole in the air that I saw above me when, you fell on me. That's all," Abisha said, as if doing so were the easiest thing in the world. Zoe looked around at all these important people staring at her, including her father, who had an anxious but eager look on his face. "Forgive me again, Your Majesty, but I don't even know how it happened. I wasn't trying to do anything. I was just looking at you through binoculars before I fell." "Then how are we going to figure this out?" asked Abisha, mildly flustered. That's when Aaron stepped forward. He kneeled before Zoe and looked at her directly. Zoe felt a tinge of fear at having the great and terrible guardian of Germany so close to her. Yet there was a warmness in his eyes. Zoe, using guardian magic is rather like waving your arm about. Just think it, and it happens automatically. It's as straightforward as that. Aaron walked over to an edge of the room and pointed to a section of plain wall. "Right here. Imagine the portal, the one we all saw. Imagine it existing right here. I know you can do it." He smiled at Zoe in encouragement as he touched the spot on the wall with a fingertip. Though Zoe still felt strange at having Aaron Lang smiling at her, she nodded and tried what he asked of her. Aaron stepped away. Zoe had always imagined a guardian using her magic by holding up her hands. Though it felt extremely awkward doing so in front of everyone, she assumed that same pose. At the same time, she focused intently on that spot on the wall, much like she had been focusing on the king and the guardians through the binoculars. For a moment, nothing. And just as Zoe was about to feel relief about not being a guardian, it happened. A circular swirl of energy grew out from a singular point on the wall and rapidly expanded to be as tall and wide as two men. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. There was something different about it, however. Zoe couldn't see anything through the portal. That's not what she remembered seeing as she was falling into the portal from the statue earlier. Aaron was one step ahead of everyone else in the room. He walked around to the opposite end of the room and said, "Excellent, Zoe. Now do it again right here, and I'm quite sure we'll see exactly what we all saw before." Zoe, feeling much more confidence now, looked at the second section of wall and repeated herself, focusing intently on that precise spot. Just as Aaron had forecasted, a second portal opened, but this time a view came through its center. A view came through both portals now, actually. The two portals were on opposite ends of the room, and both were angled toward the center. The effect they created was like nothing anyone had ever seen. Zoe looked through one portal and saw herself in the other, at the opposite angle. King Abisha stood next to Zoe and waved at himself into one portal and saw his own back through the other. Abisha walked up to a portal and stuck his arm through, waving to everyone in the room. He gave himself a good chuckle while doing so. Nearly all of the king's advisors waved back at him. "Well, I'll be," Abisha trailed off. "She truly is a guardian. Our guardian, and a miraculous one at that." The eased tension in the room caused Zoe to feel the slightest bit better about the day's events. The good-natured feeling growing in the room grew Zoe's confidence. In opening the portals, Zoe finally accepted that she was indeed the next guardian. A deluge of thoughts ran through her head about what this meant for her. These thoughts, though, distracted her. Before she knew it, the portals were closing. Quickly, Zoe had dropped her focus on them. King Abisha still had an arm through a portal. "Your Majesty!" she shouted. Abisha had pulled his arm out just in time, but a small bit of his cape was caught in the closing portal. The bit of corner on his cape was no longer on his cape, as if a knife had expertly removed it. The missing corner of cape was now lying on the ground beneath where the other portal had just closed. Theories and predictions of the possibilities of her new magic swirled about the room. One minister in a fancy chair got up and stated loudly, "Her power is incredible! We must use her in the Ministry of Transportation and Trade!" This man was clearly thinking of how to best exploit the new Guardian's magic. Another man then stood up. Zoe recognized him as the same man who held a sword to her throat less than an hour before. "We must put her into the army. Her magic could be a weapon. Imagine what she would do for defense of the homeland." One by one, other advisors of other departments and ministries proclaimed their desired purpose for the use of the new Guardian of Switzerland. They quickly started speaking over one another, and a large argument erupted in the chamber. In the course of half an afternoon, Zoe had gone from a regular child to the object of so many important people's bickering. The suddenly reignited stress made her want to break down and cry. Zoe covered her ears, closed her eyes, and wished it would all go away. The brief moment of confidence she gained after opening the portals was now gone. It was replaced by anxiety over what her future would be, seemingly to be determined by these old arguing men. She didn't ask for this. She didn't ask to be a guardian. But then came a strong, comforting presence. That presence was Aron Lang, taking her hands and looking at her with empathy. He said softly, "I remember what it was like my first day too. You are not alone." Rising to his feet, Aron called out with vocal authority of a guardian, "Your Majesty!" The room was silent again, and all eyes were on Aron. "Forgive this humble visitor to your kingdom, for your affairs are none of my business. Even so, I recommend that Zoe be properly taken care of and inducted into her new role before you overload her with her future responsibilities. This moment, after all, is only her first hour as your new guardian. I can say from experience that she will need some time to acclimate, especially given her unusually young age." Aron turned and winked back at Zoe. This surreal action from the Guardian of Germany continued to perplex her. There was a great disconnect between what she had heard of Aron and his kind actions she was experiencing now. But before she could dwell upon it, King Abisha made a declaration to the room. "The wise guardian from Germany is correct. We will have plenty of time to figure out how best to use young Miss Troxler's gifts. In the meantime, let us prepare her for her new life. Zoe and her family will be housed in the Guardian Mansion. She will be formally sworn in after 3 days' time." Abisha then addressed the other 3 guardians in the room. "My friends, would you stay for Zoe's induction ceremony?" Aron, Rokaya, and William Gage agreed, asking that messengers be dispatched to inform their respective kingdoms. Aron's airship would travel to Germany to deliver the news to his king and queen, while messengers for Rokaya and Gage would be sent via tunnel rail. I beg your pardon, your majesty, interrupted Zoe, who couldn't quite believe that she was interrupting a king. I will live here in the castle grounds? In truth, Zoe already knew the answer to her own question. Yes, replied Abishur. You, your father, and your sister. All guardians live in the mansion next to this castle, as do their families. This is the tradition of not only our country, but also many others around the world. Walter stood behind Zoe as one of Abishur's aides ran up and whispered into the king's ear. Fantastic! Walter, your other daughter has been delivered to the Guardian Mansion. She will meet you there. Guards, kindly take the Troxlers to their new home.